Meet Ethan. He's 38 years old, a senior software engineer. He writes code that literally millions of people use every single day. His IQ? It places him in the top 2% of the entire population, and he pulls in more money than 95% of Americans. Every single month, his paycheck hits his bank account, over $18,000. It's this massive, concrete validation of his brilliant mind. But, what happens next is the real story here.
Literally 3 seconds later, that massive number just begins disappearing. You've got the mortgage, taxes, the luxury car payment, the student loans, a dozen premium subscriptions he probably barely even uses, credit cards, insurance, organic groceries. Before the month even really gets going, Ethan's balance plummets to $412.87. Just last month, this absolute genius, a guy whose intellect is literally shaping the digital world, delayed going to the dentist because he just couldn't justify the out-of-pocket bill. So we really have to ask, how does someone this undeniably intelligent end up feeling so completely broke?
Welcome to The Explainer. Let's dive right into this. Because most people think they already know the answer, right? They just assume, oh, Ethan spends too much, or he's irresponsible, or he just needs to invest a bit more. But that's the easy answer, and honestly, easy answers are almost always wrong. Today, we're exploring a deeply disturbing, scientifically validated pattern where a high income quietly just replaces actual wealth. We're going to look at the hidden structures that turn highly intelligent professionals into highly profitable extraction engines for the modern corporate world.
For decades, society has sold us all this super simple equation. Be smarter, get a better education, earn more money, and you'll just naturally become wealthy. It's the promise our schools make. It's what our parents repeat to us. But reality completely refuses to cooperate. So I want you to consider a pretty terrifying question. What if your intelligence doesn't actually improve your financial decisions? What if it actively makes them worse? Millions of brilliant professionals end up feeling entirely broke, and they're part of this systemic mystery that economists actually almost didn't believe was real.
Section 1. The Intelligence Paradox. To really understand why the smartest person in the room is rarely the wealthiest person in the room, we have to look at the data. Specifically, economist Jay Zagorski's landmark 2007 study. He tracked thousands of baby boomers, and the disconnect he found is just absolutely wild. As your IQ bracket goes from average to high, your annual income scales up beautifully. A high IQ is a highly efficient machine for earning a salary. But your total accumulated net worth? It just totally flatlines. The statistical correlation between general intelligence and total accumulated wealth is essentially zero. In fact, Zagorski found that highly intelligent individuals are just as likely to max out their credit cards or declare bankruptcy as someone with average cognitive scores. Your earning power is totally distinct from your ability to actually manage that money.
To explain what's going on here, psychologist Keith Stanovich identified a cognitive condition called disrationality. Basically, this is the inability to think and behave rationally despite possessing high intelligence. Stanovich divides our processing into two different modules. Traditional intelligence tests only evaluate your algorithmic mind. That's your capacity to process complex logic and math, but they totally failed to measure your reflective mind. And your reflective mind is what actually governs real-world behavior, risk calibration, and delayed gratification. So you can be an algorithmic genius, but an absolute reflective disaster.
And this brings us to a harsh, biological reality. The human brain is incredibly metabolically expensive to run. Thinking critically burns up heavy glucose and oxygen. So, by default, your brain acts as a cognitive miser. To preserve its energy, it naturally defaults to this effortless, lazy, rapid-fire thinking for our daily transactions. Even highly intelligent people default to this lazy heuristic thinking just to save mental energy. And let me tell you, in our modern financial environment, this cognitive laziness leaves you incredibly vulnerable.
Section 2. The Biology of Spending.
Okay, this is where the story gets a bit creepy, because we aren't just talking about abstract psychology anymore. We are talking about the literal biology of transactions. Modern corporations totally understand that you are a cognitive miser, and they exploit this through something called payment decoupling. You see, your brain doesn't actually process prices as abstract math. When you see a high price, it fires up your anterior insula, literally the exact same part of your brain that processes physical pain and social distress. Parting with physical cash triggers a very real, visceral pain of paying. But modern digital wallets, tap to pay, all those subscriptions, they surgically remove the sensory feedback of handling money, which completely bypasses your biological alarm systems.
The crucial difference here comes down to friction. When you use physical cash, your anterior insula fires up. You feel the stress and you naturally spend less. But when you tap a contactless card, that pain center goes completely dark, and your nucleus accumbens lights up with a hit of dopamine and pleasure. You get the reward with absolutely zero biological friction. And auto-pay subscriptions? Well, they bypass your conscious evaluation entirely. This algorithmic cage uses frictionless technology to turn high-earning professionals into automated revenue streams. It is essentially cognitive anesthesia.
Section 3. The Intellect Trap.
So, remembering that money isn't a game of intelligence, but a game of decisions, you might be asking, why doesn't a genius like Ethan just logically spot these corporate traps and avoid them? Well, it's because of the most dangerous delusion of all, the bias blind spot. Studies actually show that high cognitive ability does not reduce your cognitive biases. It actually makes your bias blind spot bigger. Because you're smart, you suffer from the introspection illusion. You look inward, you don't see any obvious errors, and you just assume you're being perfectly objective. Instead of acting like an impartial judge, your high IQ acts as an elite defense lawyer, using all its massive processing power to build incredibly complex, perfectly logical-sounding rationalizations for what are actually just emotional, impulsive mistakes. Basically, you intellectualize your own financial ruin.
And listen, this isn't just some modern digital phenomenon. Let's look back at Sir Isaac Newton, undeniably one of the greatest algorithmic minds in human history. Back in 1720, he invested in the South Sea Company. He logically recognized it was a bubble, and he cashed out for a massive profit. Good for him, right? But then, he had to watch his less brilliant friends getting ridiculously rich on paper. Totally overwhelmed by FOMO and social contagion, Newton's massive intellect totally caved to primitive emotion. He jumped back into the market at the absolute peak with massive leverage. The bubble collapsed, and he lost the modern equivalent of $4 million. Newton later famously said, "I can calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." I mean, that is just a historical mic drop right there. It proves that absolutely no amount of algorithmic genius, no mathematical brilliance, can override primitive social contagion and evolutionary biology. You can literally map the gravitational forces of the universe and still let FOMO completely destroy your life savings.
Section 4. Escaping the Cage.
The good news here is that you aren't doomed by your own intelligence, but you do have to intentionally put friction back into your environment. So here's the behavioral playbook. First, recouple the pain of paying. Try transitioning your discretionary spending to physical cash to force your brain's insula to actually feel the transaction. Second, devirtualize your life. Delete your saved credit cards from your web browser. Force yourself to get up, find your wallet, and type the numbers out. That friction literally wakes up your reflective mind. Third, use structural pre-commitments. Automate your investments the exact minute your paycheck hits, way before your prefrontal cortex suffers from late-day decision fatigue. And fourth, before making any major speculative investment, force your inner lawyer to write a thesis on exactly why it's a terrible idea. Actively use your intellect to deconstruct your own biases.
Which leaves us with one final, really vital question to ask yourself today. Is your intellect actually building your wealth, or is it just acting as a highly paid lawyer justifying your financial ruin? True wealth isn't about how much raw data your algorithmic mind can process. It's about having the reflective discipline to resist your absolute worst evolutionary instincts. Stop letting your genius make you poor. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you some powerful tools to totally rethink your financial operating system. Until next time, stay curious and stay focused.